Hey everyone, welcome back to Build Break and Beyond, and on today's episode we continue troubleshooting the massive misfire on cylinder 3 for the world's cheapest Volvo S60R, and I guarantee you we find the problem. How can I guarantee that, you ask? Because we took the entire engine apart. And the problem lies just on the other side of that. Hey everyone, before we start this episode, I wanted to take a quick second to thank you, the viewer, the liker, the commenter, specifically the subscriber. Since the last episode where I bought the world's cheapest Volvo S60R, this channel has got 1,000 subscribers, which is awesome. It's a goal I set for myself when I started the channel last year, and I'm super happy that you guys are liking the content enough to subscribe. So without further ado, let's get back into fixing the S60R, and once again, thank you for subscribing. And we start this episode at the Junkyard, where I was trying to find parts for the S60R. I quickly found an S60 that I could get the battery tie-downs from in the trunk, and then an XC70 that I could disassemble to get the replacement wiring harness from. Here we see me talking to a non-working microphone about how excited I am to have an OEM harness to replace the rat's nest the previous owner had. I also grabbed a few more odds and ends from the XC70, including the O2 sensor. I found 2 more XC70s at the yard, including a rare Ocean Race Edition from 2006. I was also trying to get a part for my BMW's trunk, but this one didn't really have a trunk left at all. I also grabbed a small grommet for the Ranger while I was there. When I got home, I was ready to put my haul to work and started installing all the parts, starting with the Ranger. The XC500R needed a new brake pump, as the current one was making a very odd noise when power was applied. Out with the old and in with the slightly less old. Probably. That pump made a world of difference. The car sounds much better. Now onto the S60R, starting at the battery, and I had to start this small project by tapping out the hole for the battery's side bracket since it was rusted and gunked shut. That job done, I moved to the front to remove the existing O2 sensor and put in the one from the Junkyard, but I found out about 15 seconds in that the O2 sensor simply wasn't plugged into the connector at all. So after that was plugged in, the error code magically went away. Who knew? Now onto the big one, the wiring harness for the coil packs, and in case you forgot from the last episode, this is what we're working with. The connectors weren't even crimped properly, some of them came off with a slight amount of force. I'm really blown away that this car ran at all. The XC70 that I pulled the harness from was a 2005, just like the S60R, so the wiring amazingly lined up perfectly. And there we are, OEM wiring harness installed, replacing the rat's nest that was there before. I noticed that there was a small piece of the missing engine cover still bolted in, which means the previous owner tore the cover off without unbolting everything, so that's obviously going to have to be replaced. I fired the car up and it ran fine, but still had another issue. It turned out to be another unplugged connector directly on the alternator. At this point I had to take a break from the S60R troubleshooting to help my nephew with his first car ever. Alright, so my buddy Dan came over and we troubleshot this engine for a few hours and we still don't know exactly what it is. We swapped coil packs, spark plugs, fuel injectors, verified that everything was getting 12 volts, everything seems to be running fine, and we're pretty sure that we have zero compression on cylinder 3. So I'm going to lift the car up and we're going to put each cylinder at top dead center, and I'm going to do a leak down test which uses compressed air to see if we can build pressure within the cylinder. If we can't, like I suspect on cylinder 3, we can at least start to figure out what the issue is. If I had to put money on it right now, I'd say that we have a bent or burnt valve on cylinder 3. All right, and that is enough access right there for that crank nut. We can turn that and we will get each cylinder to top dead center individually, and then we can check them. All right, so we are ready to get each cylinder to top dead center, and a really easy way to indicate that is by putting these flags into each cylinder. The different heights are going to show you where the piston is in its cycle, and as soon as it gets to the top and starts going back down, we'll know that it's at top dead center. All right, and here are the not so comforting results. Cylinders 1 and 4 are okay with a small amount of leakage. 2 and 5 have an extreme amount of leakage, but I didn't hear any hissing in the intake or the exhaust, which is interesting. Cylinder 3, the problem child, was at 65% on this gauge here, but I rotated the crankshaft through the entire cycle of the piston. It never once left 65%, so it is not sealing at all at any point in its cycle. So these S60R engine blocks are known to crack. That's usually when you turn up the boost or add meth, something like that. This one I'm hoping doesn't have that issue, because that would mean an entirely new engine. One way to check for that is by filling up the coolant reservoir and watching it, see if it starts to lower overnight or over time. So I filled this up. Obviously it didn't have any coolant in it when I bought it, and I filled it up a couple days ago just to check that, and the fluid level has stayed the exact same. So I don't think that we have a cracked engine block. All right, so I thought the results from the leak down test were a bit weird with those cylinders. So I went through all of them one more time, and instead of hooking up the leak down tester, I hooked compressed air straight into the engine with a small amount of pressure on it. I then started rotating the crankshaft so that it went through all of its cycles, and every single cylinder gave me a huge amount of resistance when all the valves were closed and the piston was at top dead center, except cylinder 3, which never once gave any amount of resistance, and the airflow was constant going through. So we'll pull the head and then see what comes out. So for the last few days, I've been hearing some weird noises coming from the yard behind me, and I just peeked through, and my neighbor got chickens. There's one right there, that's the red one, and you can barely see behind here there's a white one. Alright, that is awesome. The valve cover is off, which is a huge first step. The head bolts are down here, so we'll get to those next. I just wanted to check that these lifters were in good condition. It is possible that one of them was stuck, which is what would be causing the valve to stay down. They all look fine. Pretty much everything actually looks pretty good for the overall condition of the rest of the car. And over here, the cam lobes are not rounded out. They're not misshapen or anything. They all look fine, except maybe these. Yeah, this is actually not looking that great over here, which would be cylinder 5, 4, and 2. Interesting. I'll have to clean everything off really well. Alright, well, time to take the head off. So this is pretty simple. You just get your 14mm socket, put it on at your 1/2-inch drive, set it to loosen, and use your breaker bar. I have Mr. Breaker. I've been using this for 14 years. This thing is solid. Does never let me down. Here we go. Okay, so I lied a little bit. This is my 14mm socket, and if you can see in there, it has 12 points. This cannot be used on this because it will slip. It doesn't have enough traction. You can only use a 6-sided socket. I totally forgot about that until this just slipped off one of the bolts. Thank God it didn't take the head or anything off with it. So I'm gonna run to the store again to get another tool just to remove this head. Alright, and here's the socket in question. This was actually really hard to find. It is a 6-point 1/2-inch drive deep 14mm socket. I had to go to 3 stores to get it. The first 2 didn't have it, and by the time I found it, I had higher priorities than pulling the head off the car, namely nachos and beer. So I'm gonna give it another shot this morning on getting those heads off, and hopefully this doesn't strip out or anything. All right, here we go, moment of truth. All right, and there we go. That's the reason that we have been having a misfire. There's a piece of that valve that is completely gone. And all the rest of these look great. Just that one. All right, so this is kind of like the best case scenario for the worst case scenario that we had with that misfire. Since it was nothing simple that we could diagnose, it was obviously something a little bit more complicated. All that is actually needed is one replacement valve. We can put it back in, make sure that it's holding, and then put it back on and the misfire's gone. All right, so I guess the next step for me is to source a valve and get all the new gaskets, head gasket, intake, exhaust, and a bunch of other random ones that came out, and we'll start putting that together on the next one.